I think it was about 6, 7 years ago, we had 6 liberal, progressive, wonderful Muslim speakers. And it was attended by close to 300 people. We had the whole room set up differently with the stage over there. And I asked Raheel Raza if she would bring people back. And I must tell you, the 4 people you're going to hear from are incredibly bright, sensitive, strong, because they have to be strong, because honestly, when they come and speak like they are going to speak, they are putting their own lives at risk and their families' lives at risk. So today you're going to hear very important information and takes on 3 areas: US, UK, Canada. And you will be dumbfounded at the similarities. We think, oh, that's much worse over there. We need to hear the truth about what's going on. So please give your attention to Sohail, who is going to come up and moderate these discussions. We will hear from Dalia from Washington, D.C. via video, because she is testifying in Congress, I believe, today, and could not be part of it. We will have questions after all 3 speakers, instead of after each speaker, so hold your questions for the end. You see the papers on your chairs about this incredible organization that Raheel runs. We'll hear more about that. So please welcome Sohail to come up and to moderate this, and I sincerely appreciate your all being here this afternoon.
Thank you, Alan. We've got a great line of speakers. I am what they call a reluctant activist. My profession was in the aviation field, but I've been drawn in by none other than my spouse, Raheel, who, when people ask me to describe her, I always say she's a combination of Mother Teresa and Margaret Thatcher. So she'll be addressing you, and that's the reason I'm here. Thank you, Alan. What a lovely city, what lovely weather, what a lovely Chabad, and what a lovely congregation. And I hope you won't be disappointed with the speakers. So let's start by a little note from me. The Second World War took place from 1939 to 1945, whereby most of Europe was engulfed and mentally enslaved by an ideology that supported hate, dehumanization, and elimination of an entire section of humanity, which was the Jewish population of Europe. It's through this defeat that eventually the world woke up to face the harsh reality of this menace and swore never again. Unfortunately, today, the Jewish population finds itself on similar grounds against a new version of anti-Semitism. We have been overtaken by an ideology of hate whose prime focus is to defeat Western values and attack the Jewish people. Just as initially the world watched during the Second World War, today the world is silent again. So now it's up to us, because we know what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews. We, as concerned Muslims, may not be able to stop it immediately, but can light a fire under the feet of our decision makers and law enforcement to take a much stronger stand. We are here as concerned Muslims from diverse backgrounds. that have been fighting against the Red-Green Alliance and hate for 3 decades. You'll hear more about it from our speakers, and they will try to clarify on what these challenges are and how we are to face them. Each one of them has taken a personal risk to do the work they do, facing death threats, fatwas, lawsuits, and an onslaught of hate from supporters of evil institutions like the IRGC of Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and others. So to introduce the first speaker of our panel, like Alan said, she is sent a video. Dalia Ziada is currently the Washington, D.C. coordinator for the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, ISGAP. She's an award-winning writer and political analyst specializing in governance, geopolitics, and regional security in the Middle East. Dalia studied international relations at the Fletcher School of Law, Tufts University, majoring in international security studies. So without further ado, Dalia.
Hello, everyone. This is Dalia Ziada, the research fellow and Washington, D.C. coordinator at ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. I'm so excited to be with you here today, although through video or Zoom, as I'm doing right now. For some reasons, completely out of my control, I couldn't come. And I really appreciate Dr. Alan Altman and my dear friend Raheel Raza for inviting me to this event to start with, and also for understanding the circumstances that prevented me from being able to join you. Today, my presentation will focus on the new coalition or the new unholy alliance that is forming between radical left and radical Islamists in the United States and in the West in general, and why they are starting to gain momentum in the US, especially in the aftermath of October 7. Many people think that it is actually the left groups like the Democratic Socialist Association, the DSA, or other liberal, quote unquote, because actually they are not very liberal, as they say, some progressive groups, that they are the ones who are leading the game. They are the ones who are actually allying forces that hate the United States, like the Islamists, for example, on their side. But actually the story is the other way around. The truth is, it is the Islamists who had a long-term plan, like a 100-year plan, as I will explain in more detail right now, to destroy the Western civilization from within. They are the ones who are mobilizing the West, mobilizing the progressive left to their side, to do the work on behalf of them. And understanding the story from this perspective will help us understand most of the things that we couldn't understand in the past few years. For example, the surge in anti-Semitism, the hatred towards Israel, using anti-Zionism as a platform to attack Americanism, and so on. So why I'm saying this, it's important because actually I saw all of this happening in my country, Egypt, in my home country, Egypt, and in the region long time ago. And we saw different instances of the radical left and the radical Islamists coming together and forming a situation similar to what is destroying the US right now. Believe it or not, my native Egypt at one time in history was a liberal country, was liberal, was cosmopolitan in the early 20th century. Actually, along the first half of the 20th century, it was so liberal that the Jewish people who were suffering from anti-Semitism in Europe traveled to live in Egypt, immigrated to Egypt, where it was much safer to live there because it was an open, liberal, cosmopolitan, secular country. It didn't take the Muslim Brotherhood, who appeared also in the first half of the 20th century, too long to destroy this liberal Egypt and turn it into a very nasty place where radicals are wreaking havoc, and radicals, I'm saying from the left and from the Islamist sides, are enjoying their lives, and people like me who believe in liberal values, liberal democratic values, cannot find a place there to live and have been even forced to leave under the pressure coming from these forces. In very short, like in a very short, like trying to shorten my story as much as I can, I say, actually, I came to the US 3 years ago. I studied here in the past, I worked here in the past, but I never lived in the United States until 3 years ago, in the aftermath of October 7. And I came here, I had to leave I was forced actually to run for my life outside of Egypt in October 2023, after October 7, simply because I was only one of 3 people in over 100 million population who dared to publicly condemn Hamas terrorism and say that Israel has the right to defend itself against this terrorism. And eventually, radical Islamists wanted to kill me, radical socialists in the Egyptian government wanted to imprison me, and eventually I was forced to leave. I came to the US thinking that I left the bad guys behind, and now, of course, the US is the ideal liberal space, liberal democratic space where I can exist. And to my surprise, the bad guys followed me here too. And actually, not even followed me, they were here. They were already here. And they were doing the damage, similar damage to what the Islamists and socialists did to Egypt, to what Islamists and socialists did to Iran at one point, also in history in 1970s, and everywhere else in the Middle East. And they are just doing it now in the US. And actually, this opened my eyes to the fact that I should tell the people exactly these stories. I should tell them where these people are coming from and why they want to destroy the American civilization. I wouldn't say the Western civilization, but specifically the American civilization, because the US represents all the great liberal democratic values that these people hate, starting with women's rights, human rights, and so on. And by destroying it, they think that they can establish their own empire. Some people call it a caliphate system. Some people call it a socialist Marxist system. But at the end of the day, their agenda is very clear, is to destroy the US as we know it, to destroy the Western civilization as we know it. And ironically, they are using right now, I mean, at our current time, they are using the Palestinian cause as the platform upon which they can stand and do this attack in a process that I call the Palestinization of the American politics. And on this note, to explain to you what's already happening in this Palestinization process, I will start by sharing my presentation. And of course, I look forward to knowing your questions at the end. All right. So as you can, here, let's do that. So as you can see here, what we're going to talk about in this presentation is how the Muslim Brotherhood created a strategy to subvert and empower themselves to over what we know today as the liberal democratic United States in particular, and the liberal democratic West, through a process that's called the Palestinization of American politics, and this is a term that I invented, and actually I found it an easy way to explain my points through. So right now, it's not a secret that anti-Semitism is unfortunately everywhere. It's so intense. It's so brutal, and actually, it's so unfairly explained. Many people don't understand why anti-Semitism has received such a surge in the last few years. And the reason for me is clear. It's all about anti-Americanism. It's not mainly about anti-Semitism, meaning that it's only a hate directed at the Jewish people or only a hate directed at Israel. Some people call themselves anti-Zionists, but not anti-Semites, which actually a game they are playing also to cover who they are. But it's a systematic approach that by targeting the Jewish people, they believe that they can destroy the American civilization. And why is that? Because it's not a secret. Right now, the West in general is kind of post-God. It's easy to infiltrate by groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups who claim that they have a license from God, or the responsibility to educate people about or to infiltrate people's life from a religious perspective. The only groups that cannot be infiltrated in that sense are the Jewish communities in the West. Not only because they are still keeping their religious traditions, but actually because they still focus on their collective identity, which makes them a very coherent pillar of support to the American civilization and the Western civilization in general. And from an Islamist perspective, the Islamists think that if we can destroy this last pillar, which is the Jewish community that's keeping the West standing strong, only then we can destroy this Western civilization. And to do that, they started this story of victimhood around the Palestinian issue. I'm not saying that the Palestinian people are not suffering. Of course they are. Of course they are in a situation of war, a conflict that has been extending over decades, and unfortunately it has been badly used by Arab dictators over time to distract from their own internal problems. And most recently, we started even to see European leaders using the Palestinian dilemma as a platform also, or as a way to distract their own people from their own domestic economic and political troubles. So yes, the Palestinian people are suffering. This is not what I'm discussing or challenging here. What I'm discussing is that how some people, evil people, actually evil groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in the West in particular, those who are operating in the West in particular, are using this Palestinian cause, this Palestinian suffering, this Palestinian sense of victimhood, and trying to use it to amplify hatred towards Israel, to justify hatred towards the Jewish people at large, and most recently, as we saw, justify practicing violence against the Jewish people as one step towards destroying this Jewish community, delegitimize them first, and then make it acceptable to practice violence against them, and then destroy them. And once this pillar is destroyed, as I explained earlier, the whole West will be destroyed. Is this something I'm claiming? Unfortunately, no. It's more complicated than that. The story, or this Palestinization process, actually appeared the first time in the blueprints, in the strategy documents of the Muslim Brotherhood, in what we now know from their documents as the concept of tamkeen, or empowerment of Islam in the West. And here is an excerpt from their one of their strategies. It's called an explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. It was written by members of the Muslim Brotherhood who lived here in the United States, and who immigrated actually from the Middle East in the 1960s and came to the US and other Western countries, and they sat together and they said, okay, now we have an opportunity in this open liberal democracy that's called North America, including Canada and the United States, And let's invade this liberal democracy and establish our own or empower our own version of Islam in this land. And actually, here you can read very clearly what they mean by that. So they say that the process of tamkeen or empowerment of Islam in the United States is a civilizational jihadist process. This means that it's not the traditional jihad where they can carry weapons, go and kill people around, and then occupy the land of the United States and declare their own caliphate system. No, it's a long-term systematic process that's called civilizational jihad, wherein the Muslim Brotherhood must understand that all their work in America is a kind of grand jihad to eliminate and to destroy the Western civilization from within and sabotage their miserable house with their hands and the hands of the believers. Believers here, they mean by the hands of the general Muslims who believe in God, so that it is eliminated. And God's religion, of course, they mean Islam by God's religion, is made victorious over all religions. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. And I'm telling you this as a Muslim myself. This does not represent me at all. And I'm sure also this does not represent my fellow panelists, Raheel and Haras, in any way, because we are the true Muslims. But unfortunately, these people are the ones who are speaking in the name of Islam today. The issue here is that they twisted the religion, twisted the mission of Islam to make it a tool, a weapon that they can use in what they call the civilizational jihad. And actually, the way they put it is so dangerous, because when I show you right now how they started implementing it, you will be shocked by how successful they became. This text was written in the 1992, this memorandum. Before that, the 1991, actually, this memorandum of oh my God, I'm just affected by the US-Iran deal, by this explanatory memorandum. So in this this was written in 1991, so we're speaking about how many, like over 40 years now. Another one is over 30 years. Another one, it was based on another document, another strategy that was written in 1982 that's called the 100-year plan of invading the West. So this is what we're talking about. And the most interesting thing in this memorandum actually is that they made this list that you can see on the right of the screen of organizations, Islamist organizations that are operating in the United States that they think they are their friends and their own institutions that they can use to do this civilizational jihad. And as you can see, they are all student groups, human rights groups, and so on. These documents were discovered at the Holy Land Foundation trial in 2008, for those who want to go back and read in detail of what it has. But actually, what concerns us in this pretty long strategy to invade the West from within, what concerns us for this specific presentation is how they mobilized, or how the part of their civilizational jihad was to mobilize the left, other socialist groups, other groups in general. They didn't name the left at that time, but to mobilize other groups that are not Islamist to do the job on behalf of them. And actually, this was not the initial plan, although they put it in the explanatory memorandum, but it took them too long to understand how to do this. And actually, the one who helped them do this was the very famous Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Yusuf al-Qaradawi is one of the main ideologues of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was sitting in Doha until he died in 2022. And he was kind of the grand mufti of the Muslim Brotherhood. And his work did not focus on and his messages, his teachings, and so did not focus on the Muslim Brotherhood inside the Middle East or in Egypt or in anywhere in Arab countries and Muslim countries. But actually, his focus was on the Muslims abroad, the Muslim Brotherhood abroad, the Muslim Brotherhood in Western countries. Almost all of his writings and teachings are directed to the Islamists in Western countries. And one of his most famous teachings, actually, you can see in this quote, and was reflected in a very impressive way in the explanatory memorandum, is that he told his followers that what unites the Muslims today is not race, nor culture, but causes. And why he's saying that, actually, before we complete the quote, is that because actually, if you look at the Muslims in Western countries today, they don't belong to one group. Maybe you guys, as some people looking, maybe, I don't know, of course, who is in the room right now, but I mean, the Western people in general, when they look at the Muslims in Western societies, they really cannot differentiate between who is who. But let me tell you, the Muslims in the West are very diverse. They come from all backgrounds you can imagine. You have the Middle Eastern Muslims, and among these Middle Eastern Muslims, you have actually different categories, but no need to go through all of them now. And you have the Asian Muslims from places like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Southeast Asian countries. And you have Black American Muslims, and you have African Muslims, actually. And you have a very diverse group, and each group of Muslims within this Muslim community, based on their ethnic background, they have different priorities and they have different interests. Well, for example, you find the Middle Eastern Muslims are the most vocal and the most active about issues related to the Middle East, like Iran, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so you will see groups like the Black American Muslims, for example, who are my favorite, by the way. They are so patriotic. Their concerns are all about America. Their concerns about their own American life. They don't care much about what's happening overseas. So I've been almost all the mosques of all of these groups, and unfortunately, I belong to the Middle East Muslim category, so I know exactly what I'm talking about here. So when you approach these Muslim communities, you will see how diverse they are. And that's why Al-Qaradawi emphasized this, because for the Muslim Brotherhood, who maybe have some leverage or some influence over the Middle East Muslims, maybe they will not have the same influence on other ethnic Muslim groups. So to unite them, to have this influence and leverage over them and use this with policymakers, Al-Qaradawi instructed his followers in the Muslim Brotherhood in Western countries to unite Muslim communities, not based on race or culture, but based on causes. And he said, chief among these causes is the Palestinian cause, is Palestine. It should remain the compass of Islamic consciousness until Al-Aqsa is liberated, which is very, very interesting, because this is, once again, look at what happened in the past 2 years in the aftermath of October 7. This is exactly what happened. So it seems that the teachings of Al-Qaradawi, unfortunately, is working really well. So in the aftermath of October 7, which is, I consider, a case study of how Tamkeen is working today, what happened? First of all, we saw the focus or the catalyst to the Brotherhood strategy, or October 7 itself was seen as a catalyst to the Muslim Brotherhood strategy. It was the moment when they finally were able to provide the leftist groups that they have been trying to associate themselves with for about 5 years now, they were finally able to give them something that they can use and work together on. So if we go back like 5 years or so with the start of the Black Lives Matter movement and the rise of the woke movement and so, what we started to see is that the progressive left started to gain momentum. And they started even to dictate politics, and policymakers and politicians started to take them into account really seriously. Before, this was not the case. And as they gained more momentum, the Islamists thought that, well, now perhaps is our chance to latch to this progressive left, the radical left within the left. And by the way, let me also clarify here, I like the left in general. I think they are great people. They are mostly well-meaning, except that inside the left, inside this liberal democratic movement, unfortunately, there is a newborn hateful group that is promoting hate to America on this platform, once again abusing this liberal space and open space to do exactly what the Islamists are doing, which is the desire to destroy the Western civilization from within. So the Islamists tried by first during the climate change or the era of the climate change, I would say the few months of the climate change movement to latch themselves. And then during the era of the gender and trans and LGBTQ movement, they also tried to latch them to the leftist movement, but it didn't work, and so on and so on. And even during the Black Lives Matter and so on, but it didn't work. It didn't fully work because there are different values here. For example, the Islamists cannot fully support LGBTQ rights. It's completely against their teachings and their beliefs. So what happened is that when October 7 happened, when the Gaza war started, for the first time, the Islamists found a currency that they can offer to the left to allow them to come within the left, to come within this, to become part of this progressive movement. And on the other side, the progressives finally found the cause that can keep going on for longer than a few months and can actually gain support or attract support from groups that are not even politicized. Because if you go to anybody and show like the pictures of people in war, being killed in war and so, like the situation in Gaza, of course people would easily sympathize with that. So the two groups kind of found their own lost currency kind of in the October 7 aftermath. And we saw this fast scale of ideological alignment across different sectors, activist groups, campus organizations, even elected officials. And so it was not organic outrage. It was not just spontaneous thing happening, but it was the fruit of years of groundwork that was based on three things: narrative seeding and manipulation. Groups like Al Jazeera, for example, that is broadcast in English as well. And we saw it became very active and even became a source for many Americans in the aftermath of October 7. The institutional infiltration, the elected officials who represent this movement in the Congress, in some government offices, and so on. So the institutional infiltration, and this also includes the infiltration of the civil society, and finally the strategic alliances. And by this I mean the alliances between the radical left and the radical Islamists that we are seeing today in what is known as the Red-Green Alliance. And this table here actually shows you how the coordination between this red, which is the radical left, the Marxist movement, and the green, the radical Islamist movement, has increased over time in the United States before October 7 and after October 7, and how actually how they were able, in other words, to empower each other through this coordination. And this graph summarizes it actually in a better way. One very, very interesting case study of how this alliance worked is the Westchester for Palestine. So WestPac or Westpac Foundation is a leading force or has been a leading socialist group that has been operating since 1974. Now they call themselves a leading force for progressive social change. And in April 2025, as part of this movement that once again brought the Islamists and this progressive left together, they published an application of people who are interested to join them and to become members. And they called it Westchester for Palestine Membership Interest Form. And in the points where they explaining to people why they should join Westchester for Palestine, they wrote this excerpt. Number 4, internationalism. They said this, and actually, I mean, when I'm reading it, you compare this to what I just told you about this concept of empowerment that the Muslim Brotherhood introduced in the 1990s. So they said to their prospective members that they want to promote internationalism, which means we have, I'm quoting, we have a responsibility as those living within the settler colonial project known as the United States. These are American people calling the United States the settler colonial project known as the United States. They have the responsibility to resist the violence of the US empire at home and abroad. As internationalists, we believe that all people have the right to self-determination, and we stand in solidarity with all national liberation struggles across the globe resisting US imperialism. Of course, like, I'm sure you now understand why the language is so provocative and why this language should not be seen as just another socialist groups using some jargon about like some colonialist era jargon, you know, like colonialism, US empire, US imperialism, and so on. No, it's more than that. It has very much to do with this concept of tamkeen that the Islamists has adopted and unfortunately was mirrored in the progressive left movement that want to destroy the Western civilization to establish another form of civilization for the red. They want to establish a Marxist United States. For the Islamists, they want to create an Islamist caliphate on the ruins of the United States. So this is the danger we are living and we are dealing with right now. This is another case. It's mainly led by the Muslim Brotherhood about it's a program online called Education for Palestine and was targeting some schools and so. But I don't think we have enough time for this. But this is a problem we are facing today. This is the dilemma. Let me just try to get out of. Yeah. So this is the dilemma we are facing today. We are seeing the radical left and the radical Islamists coming together under what seems to be a legitimate umbrella. For a few years now, they are calling it the Palestinian cause. We don't know what is the new name is going to be after the Palestinian cause wanes down and it's not attracting followers and attracting supporters as it was before, or in the past few years in particular. Some now are using a new platform saying that, we are just anti-Zionist, not anti-Semites and so, but we all know that the end target of this is not only Israel, is not only the Jewish people, but it is you guys, everyone who's sitting here in this room, everyone who's living in this country, everyone who's living in Western civilizations in general. So the target is the United States, and that's why we need to work to make sure that they will not destroy the United States the same way they destroyed my native Egypt, the same way Iran and the Marxists at their time, the Islamic regime in Iran and the Marxists in their time destroyed Iran and destroyed the Middle East, actually, as we see today. Is it so dark, like there is no hope that this could change? Actually, it's not. It's true that this red-green alliance is so loud, so powerful, and they have their own way to influence policy. And now, as we speak, they are influencing politics. Most of the elections, unfortunately, are going. Most of the midterm elections are going in their favor. However, I know and I've seen, and I'm one of them actually. I've seen so many people inside the US who are really fighting the good fight. And I can speak to you for hours about our team at ISGAP, for example. But still, it's very, very important that every one of you considers themselves a soldier in this fight, really, against these groups that want to destroy the Western civilization from within. Don't let them do that. And I'm saying this as someone who owe a lot to the United States. It is the country that gave me my education, that gave me a career. It's actually, I started my career from here, from the United States, a long time ago. I won't say how long ago. And also, it gave me a refuge when my own people wanted to kill me for saying the truth about Israel and about Hamas. So I don't want to see it being destroyed, and I will keep fighting this fight. I hope every one of you will continue to fight this fight. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your comments and also to your questions at the end of this session. And I hope I will be able, like, for the technicians organizing this, will be able to bring me in at the end of the presentation to take your questions. Thank you once again to Dr. Alan, to my dear friend Raheel, and to everybody in the room. Thank you so much. Once again to Dr. Alan, to my dear friend Raheel, and to everybody in the room. Thank you so much.
Now, if this has shaken you up just a little bit, wait till you hear the other two speakers. Let me add that whatever is being spoken here is not based on anybody's opinion. These are facts. These are happenings. These are documented proof. So there is hope, but there's something to be concerned about as well. Talking about concern, Raheel Raza is our next speaker. She is the president of the Council of Muslims Facing Tomorrow, founding member of the Muslim Reform Movement, director for Forum for Learning, president steering committee of the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, National Advisory Board of Abrahamic Global Peace Initiative, award-winning journalist, interfaith discussion leader, public speaker, advocate for human rights, gender equality, and dignity in diversity. So without going any further, because there are 2-3 pages of her achievements, I'll invite Raheel Raza.
Thank you. He forgot to add that he's been my spouse for 50 years. So it's easy to forget that. Good evening. I'd like to thank Alan Altman, the JCC, Inga, and everyone who has made this evening possible, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Can you all hear me at the back? Okay. I'm a Pakistani-born Muslim woman, a Canadian by choice, an author, and a grassroots activist who has spent more than 3 decades speaking, writing, and warning about the dangers of Islamist extremism and hate-based ideologies. I am founder and president of an organization called the Council for Muslims Against Anti-Semitism. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but it exists, with a board and steering committee of Muslim scholars, of thinkers, academics across the globe. In fact, one of our steering committee members, is here. We are really proud to share with you that two of our members are running for Congress. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser from Arizona and Dalia Al-Aqidi from Minnesota, who is standing up against the infamous Ilhan Omar. So you'll understand that since October 7th, our work has been cut out for us, especially in Canada. And I'll tell you why. Many of you may be aware that your great leader with the changing hair color had put out some feelers about making Canada the 51st state. However, let me expose you to the state that Canada is in right now, and he may change his mind. The Islamists found a home in Canada many, many years ago. I mean, you've heard Dalia talk about the way they infiltrate. Now, Muslims represent approximately 5 to 7% of Canada's population, depending on the source, making Islam one of the country's fastest-growing religions. Now, at this point, I want to make an important distinction, which I think is very important for you to understand. Islam is a faith practiced by nearly 2 billion people across the world. Islamism is a political ideology based on the idea that Islam, and I quote, that Islam is the solution to everything, that the religion dictates how everything in society, politics, the economy, and more should be run, and where Islamist rule must be imposed on others. And you already heard about this. Now, terrorism, violence, extremism, and religious fanaticism gone wild are the products of this ideological messaging. The good news is that the vast majority of Muslims simply want to live their lives in peace. Islamists, however, seek to use religion as a political system and a vehicle for power. For years, many of us who spoke out against this distinction were dismissed, or we were silenced, or we were accused of spreading fear. We were called fearmongers. Yet today, we are witnessing developments that should concern anyone who values democracy, freedom of expression, women's rights, minority rights, and the rule of law. The question before us this evening is not whether Muslims belong in the West. We do. The question is whether Islamist movements have successfully exploited the openness of Western democracies to advance an agenda that is fundamentally at odds with liberal democratic values. And you heard Dalia tell you that that is an absolute fact. So I won't go into the background of how and why they've done this. But as someone who has spent years challenging Islamism from within my own community, especially after the tragedy of 9/11, which we, by the way, have been conveniently made to forget, I believe that this is one of the defining issues of our time. And the evidence is found not only in overt acts of terrorism. This new form is subtle. It's under the radar. It's about language. And you've heard it loud and clear from Dalia about how they infiltrate and how this is done. It can be seen in the spread of extremist narratives, the intimidation of moderate yet observant Muslims like us, the rise of anti-Semitism, the radicalization occurring on campuses, the influence of foreign-funded organizations, and the growing reluctance of political leaders to confront these issues honestly. In the late 1990s, Islamist extremist groups tied to Egypt, Iran, and other Middle Eastern countries were involved in raising money in Canada. And I'm talking about 1990s. This prompted the then director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, known as CSIS, to testify before the Canadian Senate. And the CSIS investigations of more than 50 organizations and hundreds of individuals uncovered that there were more international terrorists organizations active in Canada than anyone anywhere else in the world. That, my friends, is our claim to fame. And tonight, I want to examine a simple but urgent question. Have the Islamists succeeded in their agenda? My answer is that they have achieved significant success, but they have not yet won. And whether they succeed ultimately depends on whether democratic societies find the courage to recognize the challenge and confront it. And that is why we are here today. Let me outline to you specifically the challenges we face in Canada, rising anti-Semitism being on top of the list. According to the latest Canadian police-reported hate crime data, Jews remain the most frequently targeted religious group in Canada, despite being roughly only 1% of the population. Following the October 7th massacre, Jewish advocacy organizations reported such a high level in anti-Semitism, starting on October 8th. So, as Dalia said, this is not something that happened by a coincidence. This is not something that happened overnight. This was in the planning stage for years. And this is where strategically these extremists and the Iran-sponsored terrorist groups, they have been far ahead of us in terms of planning and then enacting their strategies while we are putting out fires as they happen. Now, this is such a dangerous trajectory because we know that hate leads to dehumanization of the other. And the Holocaust is a constant reminder of this. The world cannot afford to live with what we call historical amnesia. We have to, the saying never again means that we have to keep bringing back what happened and make sure it never happened again. And now, ironically, many of you may not know this, but within the 57 Muslim majority countries of the world, with the exception of 3 or 4, there were no mass demonstrations allowed. In Pakistan, where I come from, after October 7th, it was forbidden to have a rally flying a Hamas flag. And this was happening in many Muslim countries. And here in the West, it was open agenda for the Islamists, for the Hamas supporters to go around waving these flags. It makes you think, and it should make you think. And it also brings up the huge question which we are sometimes afraid to ask, and you must ask it again and again. Why is the West so gullible? Why are our leaders so gullible? They are your elected officials. They are our elected officials. They should be doing what we want them to do, but they cave in, and we must ask this question. Now, Canada has listed dozens of terrorist entities under the criminal code, including Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others. Now, as Dalia explained, all of them have different backgrounds, they have different agendas, but they come together for one joint cause. You know what that cause that brings them together. They hate for Israel and the Jews. They need a common enemy to divert the rest of the world and the leaders from what their real agenda is. And this Palestinian cause, all these rallies in the street, very, very effectively diverts people from talking about what we are saying here today. And let me assure you that this conversation we are having is not really welcome in many places where there is political correctness and where the woke culture takes place. So, it's so wonderful to be able to speak freely. So, the IRGC, is the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. They have a very well-funded presence in Canada. For years, the operatives have been there, and they fund their money that comes into educational institutions and Islamist organizations and their mosque. It comes through the people who are spread out all over Canada. According to latest security statistics, there are more than 700 IRGC operatives actually living and operating in Canada. Guess how many have been deported? 1. And even that paperwork is taking place. And for me, this is of particular concern. I have a personal connection to this. After I started speaking out after October 7th as a Muslim against Hamas, against the regime in Iran, I was targeted by the IRGC. And they took my entire social media and website from the last, and my emails from the last 20 years, translated it into Farsi, took my photograph and posted it on the IRGC website. And you know what that does? That puts a target on my forehead, just like Salman Rushdie. So some Yahoo somewhere looks at it and said, oh, and the main underlined points in that were, she goes to Israel. She supports Israel. So my support for Israel has become a personal threat against me. But you know what? The more they threaten me, the more I will stand up and speak. They are so terrified of a powerful Muslim woman. It gets to them more than anything else, the fact that I, as a Muslim woman, have openly stood up and said, the regime has to go. It doesn't represent Islam. It doesn't represent Muslims. It only represents patriarchy and power, and they have to go. So, obviously, they hate my guts. It's something you learn to live with. Now, in the terror network in Canada is not something new. It's not something that happened after October 7th. As far back as 2006, there was a planned terror attack to storm the Canadian Parliament and, listen to this, behead the Prime Minister. And this was thwarted, and there was an arrest of 17 Muslims, youths, 5 of them juveniles. And in 2009, a gentleman by the name of Momin Khwaja became the first Canadian to be charged and convicted under the country's Federal Anti-Terrorism Act for financing and facilitating terrorism. The same year, a banned group called let me put it this way, a group called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is banned in Muslim countries, was holding a conference in Toronto. And they are sympathetic to jihadist ideology. I wanted to know what it is that they're saying, because you have to have proof of the pudding, right? And they know my face because it's all over the media. So I wore a burqa, the first time in my life and probably the last, because most of the women there, the women sat one side, men sat one side. My husband has a beard, so we went there looking, very jihadi, and they couldn't see my face. And it was terrifying. But the gentleman who spoke said, they're bringing Sharia law into Canada, and they're going to build a caliphate, and he's going to be the caliph. Openly. The point I'm trying to make is that today, they're not scared to say this anymore. They have immunity. They know nobody's going to touch them. So in USA, Canada, UK, Haras will share with you, they say this very openly, but we managed to get their next conference banned. So, we do our work. Now, the most frightening thing in Canada is that the Islamists have infiltrated our educational systems. I know they have in the USA as well, through funding from Iran and Qatar, but because of Iran's influence in Canada, Jew hatred incidents in educational institutions are up by 211%. And not only that, without any fear, they target synagogues. They shot twice at a girls' school. What kind of cowards shoot at a girls' school? But that's who they are. They shot at a girls' school, they have attacked businesses, and our organization has been front and center in writing letters of support to the owners of those businesses, and we go there constantly after these attacks happen to show them that not all Muslims are like what these guys are doing. But our government has never been able, and our policymakers have not addressed this issue of foreign funding, because that foreign funding is still coming in. And you know as well as I do that when foreign funding comes in, it comes with an agenda. Obviously, it comes with an agenda. So the government needs to look to where it's coming. It's been coming in from Qatar. It now comes in from Iran. And although the Canadian political system allows them to freeze the assets of terror entities, political leaders have been very slow to actually implement this. And it is these implementations of laws which exist on the books, like arresting the people who are spreading hate. It's this slow process that allows this to continue. Now, although you heard that there is a heavy Muslim Brotherhood presence in the United States, a similar heavy presence of the IRGC in Canada, but the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, also has a very strong presence. They have an affiliate called the Muslim Association of Canada, along with the Virginia-based Institute of Islamic Thought, IIIT. They provided $2 million to set up a chair of Islamic studies at a Canadian college. And it was done with an Anglican affiliate of the University of Western Ontario. So speakers like the infamous Tariq Ramadan, who is the grandson of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood and had faced sexual misconduct charges, are called into universities as glorious speakers, and they are revered. Now, let me tell you the dismal situation, very quickly, of the schools. The Toronto District School Board has actually incorporated an anti-discrimination strategy, which is known as APR. This is anti-Palestinian racism. So, forget the anti-Semitism that's taking place in schools, where Jewish students are being harassed. They can't wear any identification. But yes, they have a policy called APR. We fought long and hard to try and remove it, but we just don't have that kind of power because there are people on the boards of these educational institutions who are the infiltrators, along with policymakers. Now, this, of course, is going to taint the minds of young people. Now, what the Canadian government has also done is that they have sort of codified the idea of Islamophobia. I'm sure you all know that the term Islamophobia was coined after 9/11 to stop discussion and debate about Islam and Muslims. You know, it has no roots, really. But in Canada, they have a Muslim woman who heads this council, and Canadians are terrified. I mean, Canadians are ordinarily very naive people. If you step on their toes, they say sorry. But now with this whole Islamophobia bogey they are terrified of saying anything. Even listening to talks like this, because they'll be accused of racism, discrimination, Islamophobia. This is not to say, and we want to be very clear that there is no discrimination or racism against Muslims. Of course this is. But we call it anti-Muslim bigotry, which is what it is. We should speak out against racism against any community. In Canada, however, the Muslim communities, especially promoted by the Islamists, are given special deference. They are given special status. And the students are given special status. We call this unreasonable accommodation. A lot of unreasonable accommodation takes place, and it creates resentment. So we know that sooner or later, there is going to be pushback. Now, in terms of the government, the Islamists have infiltrated every corridor of power. They have infiltrated almost every political party. Our Liberal Party leader, our Prime Minister Mark Carney, went to an event hosted by one of the well-known Islamist groups, and he stood on their premises and said that your values are our values. So, you know, that says a lot. They have legitimized these Islamist organizations, and they have no qualms, the political leaders, about, say, using terms like genocide, colonization, apartheid. Canada is famous. In every university, they have an anti-apartheid week. I went once to York University, and I said, you know, you should have a Saudi apartheid week, Pakistan apartheid week, on the countries where there really is apartheid and human rights violations, and remove this. Of course, you know, they never invited me back, but that's a whole other story. What I'm trying to say is that this is so rampant. The new anti-Semitism is this terminology, and this they are trying to normalize. They're trying to normalize these terms, colonizer, genocide, so on. And when our political leaders use the same terms, it justifies it. Let me quickly mention immigration, which I know is a huge issue here in the United States. Now, for the past 2 decades, immigrants coming to Canada did not undergo sufficient vetting, despite the fact, I mean, we're immigrants, but we came to make Canada our home. We have a duty to protect it. We brought up our children with a Canadian identity, not a hyphenated identity. They are Canadians. And this is something that's missing from the current state of immigrants who are coming either as refugees from Muslim lands, or they're coming on the backs of a lot of the foreign-funded money that's coming in, and their minds, and their associations, and their affiliations, and their loyalties are not to the country they've come into. They're to the countries back home. And that tells you exactly why they become problematic. And of course, I won't speak in detail about the threat posed by the woke culture, because, you know, it silences anyone who wants to speak out. Now, we have a mandate in one of our organizations that we use the 3 E's. We say expose the problem, educate the masses, and then empower for change from within. You know, we as Muslims are the frontline warriors in this battle against Islamism, in this battle against anti-Semitism, in this battle against hate, because they can't accuse us of Islamophobia, although they tried. So, have the Islamists succeeded? In some ways, yes. They have succeeded in intimidating critics. They have succeeded in convincing policymakers that criticism of Islamism is somehow criticism of Muslims and Islam. They have succeeded in exploiting the language of victimhood while ignoring the victims of Islamist oppression. Majority of victims of Islamist oppression are Muslims themselves, and they ignore this reality. But they have not succeeded completely. Across the Muslim world, there are brave men and women who are pushing back, young Iranians who are risking their lives for freedom. There are reformers who are speaking out, and Muslims who are refusing to surrender their faith to political extremists. And the future of the West, USA, Canada, Europe, UK, will not be determined by the Islamists. It will be determined by whether democratic societies have the confidence and the strength to defend their values, and whether moderate Muslims are willing to challenge extremism from within. It has to work on both sides. What is drastically missing is an alternate narrative, because we, as an organization, lack the support and funding to go any further. The Jewish community in Canada has been very supportive. They're a staunch ally of our work, because we have told them that this is a struggle between freedom and authoritarianism, between democracy and theocracy, between those who believe in pluralism and those who seek ideological control. All is not lost, and I will end with words from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who said, and I quote, "Jews cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. The victim cannot cure the crime. The hated cannot cure the hate. It would be the greatest mistake for Jews to believe that they can fight this alone. The only people who can successfully combat hate and anti-Semitism are those who are active in the cultures that harbor it, and that is us." Thank you so much.
I know you must be having a lot of questions, and we are prepared to stay here. This is the house of God, so we don't feel threatened. We are only 3 Muslims with 200 Jews and others. So we will stay here as long as the questions are answered, and if we can't answer them, we'll take them with us and email you a good reply. Our next speaker is a soccer fanatic. It was difficult bringing him here because there were 2 exciting matches he wanted to watch, but he is here today. Haras Rafiq is a Vice President Policy for ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. He has been a counter-extremism and counter-terrorism expert in the UK since 2004 and CEO of Pink Llama Productions and Voxtura media outlets, working in Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom. Haras has also recently consulted on numerous international projects on countering extremism and counter-terrorism in the UK, USA, the Gulf countries, and Canada. So welcome, Haras.
Thank you, Sohail, and thank you, Alan, for inviting me here. Although it's, for me, it's about 12:20 in the morning. As you can probably tell from my accent, I got here a couple of nights ago. I'm scared. I don't know about you. I'm scared. But the reality of the situation is that we have a lot to do. And I want us to consider whether we're living through a period of the Weimar Republic, whether we are witnesses to history repeating itself again. There is a global crisis of modernity, of many things nation states are failing, and that's, I believe, the era that we're living in right now. I'm going to walk amongst you, and I'm going to have my presentation. I'm partly doing that because I like to be here with you, but also to make sure that my muscles don't seize up with jet lag. The previous speakers have talked about their personal experiences on how and why they've come to this. So I guess I should really talk about why I, as a British Muslim, I'm really involved in this. And my background is that my mother's side have been in the United Kingdom since 1901. My father, 125 years. My father landed in 53, 1965 I was born, and voila. When I was in the United Kingdom as a youngster, there was no such thing as faith-based identity politics. It didn't exist. If people liked me, I was English. I was taught at school that I am English. If they didn't like me, they called me the P word. And I grew up like anybody else of my generation, where within the house, piety was important. The personal relationship that one had as a Muslim, traditional classical Islam. This personal relationship to do good rather than evil and connect with God was the most important part. And of course, the Pakistani curries, which I miss every day. But outside the house, I was like anybody else in Britain at the time. There were about 3 or 4 people that were the same color as me. And I grew up like anybody else, and I was a punk rocker at the age of 14. In fact, at the age of 14, I had orange hair, a Mohican, and I snuck in to see the Sex Pistols at one of their last concerts at the Middleton Civic Hall. I was underage. I went to university. I went to read medicine. I decided that I preferred the radical far-left ideology instead, and I wanted to ban the bomb. So I dropped out of medicine and did something else, a degree for the sake of it. But anyway, after I left, I got into the corporate world, and I gave that up, all those views. And I ended up on the board of some quite large organizations in the 90s and the early noughties, international organizations. And then something happened. In 2003, my youngest child, my daughter, came home. And one day, she said, "Daddy, I don't want to be a Muslim." I said, "Why don't you want to be a Muslim? What have we done to you?" She said, "Muslims are always angry and they're always killing people. I don't want to be angry and I don't want to kill anybody. I'm only 7 years old." Imagine. As a parent, what I felt. So I said, "Show me, where are you getting these messages from?" And she turned on the television. It was 2003. It was a time of the Taliban, NATO were in Afghanistan. And there was video of the Taliban burning effigies of George Bush and Tony Blair, firing rifles and wanting to kill people. So this started a process of self-reflection for me. As somebody who had this upbringing, I turned to God when I was in trouble. I fasted. But I wanted to explore Islam. What is Islam about? So I traveled around the world, ended up in some strange places, studied and received what's called an Ijaza permission from two of the world's leading sheikhs who happen to be traditional classical Sufi scholars. And Ijaza is that it's a bit like Jedi master and student, where one trains under a master, and then one reaches a certain proficiency. One has an ijaza to teach and to do various things in spirituality and jurisprudence and a whole bunch of other things. So I came back to the UK and I left what I was doing, and I set up an NGO, and I ended up since then working with advising 5 UK Prime Ministers. I was the CEO of the world's first counter-extremism think tank, Quilliam Foundation. Working out of the US, Canada, UK, and around the world. We closed it down during COVID for a whole bunch of reasons. We were employing about 80 people at the time. And my current incarnation is I'm the Vice President of Policy for the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. I have been the Managing Director in the past, which I did for a year, interim. And now, so Dalia is somebody that kind of reports into me and other people as well. So what am I going to talk to you about today? Okay. I'm going to take it a little bit further. I'm going to talk about Islamism beyond Islamists. What have they actually achieved? Hamas achieved something after October the 7th that has never been done for 1,400 years of Islamic history. That is where they got Muslims who often curse each other, don't believe that each other is a Muslim, to come together on an emotional state of mind. They also, as you've heard, got the left, or the regressive left, as we call it. But one thing you won't have heard about is the right. The right is also working with the Islamists. In fact, the former Secretary of State Michael Gove, who's now Lord Michael Gove, gave a speech in Parliament when he was Secretary of State talking about this. The reason I know is I helped write it. And we coined a phrase about, 7 years ago. And that was, we started looking at Islamist radicalization, terrorism. Oh, and by the way, along the way, I also did 3 years as the advisor to Europol is the European equivalent to the FBI, head of counterterrorism, Gilles de Kerchove. And we realized that it started with Islamism, but it's gone beyond, and we're really talking about a triple threat to our liberal democracies. I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. And also, what are the pathways? How are people being radicalized? So I guess the agenda really is defining the threat, there is violence and non-violence extremism. I'm going to talk about Islamism. We've heard about the Muslim Brotherhood. They're not the only organization, by the way. Let's not forget about Jamaat Islami. Then I'm going to talk about some of the other theologically extreme conservative trends. Looking at the triple threat, the red-green, the green-brown, and actually how Islamists have achieved a phenomenon where they actually are getting the left and the right to actually do their dirty work for them. And I'm going to talk about how these people are being radicalized. I'm not, section 3, I'm not going to touch on too much because I think my colleagues have talked about that. But I am going to talk about how fast it takes for somebody to be radicalized. And I can use figures from Ziada because he sat next to me in Prague and said certain things which I couldn't have said before, but I can say them now. And then I'm going to look at the movements of money. Qatar is really, really playing a double game. And if we do nothing else and we're able to persuade Qatar to go the same way of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and others, who, by the way, are also equally responsible for creating this monster that is Islamism, whether it's Muslim Brotherhood or Jamaat Islami, and funding to the tune of hundreds of billions. In fact, Qatar has somewhere in between 500 billion and $1 trillion of soft power assets it's playing with. And then, what do we do? What does this gap do? The 5 Ds, how can we work together to figure some of this out? So, some definitions to start with. What is extremism? This is my definition. Extremism, to me, is a desire to enforce illiberal views on somebody else that are at odds with a liberal secular democracy. It can be Islamist, but it can also be from the, I know as somebody who comes from the far left as a student, originally. Somebody who wanted to take the bus to the revolution. That was me. And the far right. And there is a symbiotic relationship between all of these phenomenons, and the one thing that binds them is their anti-Semitism. So Islamism, we talked about it a little bit earlier on, and you've heard a lot about it. These are the people kind of responsible for it. There is a difference between Islam and Islamism, as Raheel mentioned. Islam is a set of ideas, a set of values, in the same way that there is a difference between social and socialism. Social is how we interact. Socialism is a distinct political ideology that happens to be left of center. Islam is a religion of faith. So many people practice it so many ways. Islamism is this distinct political ideology that wants two things. By the way, it's not a made-up name. The Muslim Brotherhood calls themselves Islamiyun to differentiate from the Egyptian Muslims of the time that Dalia talked about. They called themselves Islamists. What are the two things they want? They actually don't want anything in the United States. It's a tactic. They don't want anything in the United Kingdom. It's a tactic. They don't want anything in Canada. It's a tactic. They want to set up a utopian Islamic state, vis-a-vis a la ISIS, as they tried, and enforce their version of state law based on their interpretation of Sharia. And the second thing they want to do is to spread that around the world and conquer Mecca and Medina. For the Shia Islamist, Jerusalem has no meaning, by the way. Nothing at all. It's a tactic. I said they want two things. The third thing is their tactic, and that is to wipe the opium of the masses off the face of the earth, and that's Israel. If Israel didn't exist, they'd invent something else. I want to do a little sidebar here. How many of you have heard of the phrase Sharia law? Do you want to just let me know? Okay. There's no such thing. And I'm going to explain to you why there's no such thing. When we talk about Sharia law, we talk about law as the noun and Sharia as the adjective describing the noun. The Arabic word, anybody here speak Arabic? Anybody in the room? Okay. The Arabic word for law is qanun. You will not find it in the Quran, and you won't find it in the Hadith. There is a word called Sharia, and it is a noun, and it literally means the road to the oasis or the road to water, purification, and it is a personal code that each individual has within their own context. That's the traditional classical explanation of the word Sharia, which has been practiced since the Saudis created the state that is Saudi Arabia. There is something called jurisprudence, fiqh. And there are so many different schools of jurisprudence. And at this stage, I'm going to say, Dalia said that Islamism is not really Islam. And I think maybe Raheel, I'm going to say something else. Islamism is a plausible interpretation of Islam, one of many, but it is contemporary. These guys came up with it. These are the fathers and the grandfathers, even before Qaradawi, and there are two main elements from it. For the United Kingdom, Muslim Brotherhood is important, but before that we had the Jamaat Islami from Bangladesh. They came over in the 70s. The Muslim Brotherhood came much later. It's different in the United States. I mentioned Sharia, jurisprudence. Dawla is this Islamic state. This desire to enforce state law as Sharia wasn't even done. For all the people, one law was not even done under the time of the Ottomans. It's never been done before. There were times in Andalusia to fight off the Frankish, etc., etc. But this is a contemporary interpretation of Islam. And you have different types of people. You have the Salafis, the Wahhabis. The Wahhabis and the Salafis are a reformation gone wrong. Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, a guy in the 1800s who wanted to fight off the Ottomans as the colonial settlers. Language, we're hearing it again. Because the Ottomans controlled land in the Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East. He came up with a new interpretation of a theology which we called Wahhabism, and they called themselves Salafi. And you have three types: Quietist, revolutionary, and jihadist. Quietist is a bit like the Amish who will wear the trousers. These guys will wear the trousers above their ankles, and they won't have a television, and they don't harm anybody else. Good luck. In a liberal democracy, you want to do that? I may not like it. Do it in your own home. Then you have the revolutionary. You see these guys on the streets with their dawah stalls. Come to Islam. Here's a Quran. And then, of course, you have the jihadist. And jihadism is the use or support of violence for the Islamist cause. Within the Shia traditions, Islamism didn't really exist until the Iranian Revolution, when the Ayatollah learnt from, how do I go back? There is a way, but I don't know how. Let's go. Learn from these people. Qutb, Maududi, Al-Banna, all these people before, the Ayatollah learned from them. So you had this cross-pollination, because until then, the Shias had separation of church and state. Okay, let's talk about the regressive left. The regressive left are in denial of the term Islamism. They stifle and control the debate, as has been discussed, when it comes to challenging this fascist ideology that is contemporary, that is Islamism. And they have this bigotry of low expectations. Essentially, what they mean by that is that we will stand up for LGBT, for example. We will stand up for women's rights. We will stand up for a whole bunch of things. But the natives don't know any better. We don't expect anything better from the Muslims, in this case the Islamists. We'll give them a pass. This is a bigotry. They really suffer from this. And of course, they're ideologically inconsistent, and they believe, we did my previous organization, Quilliam Foundation, We did an in-depth report on the grooming gangs in the United Kingdom. It got coverage on Sky, CNN, all over the place. Not a single Muslim attacked it. The only attacks we had were from people from my old ideology, the left. We weren't proper Muslims. This is somebody, we're sitting with somebody who's trained and learned in Islam as well. Somebody who trains imams, trains sheikhs. This is what I do in my spare time. Teach them theology. Teach them how to be Muslims from a traditional classical perspective. I'm not a proper Muslim. Raheel's not a proper Muslim according to these people. Why? Because we challenge Islamism. Then we have the far right. And they say all of Islam, and therefore all people who practice Islam correctly are jihadists. In fact, the translations that they use of the Quran are the same ones that Al-Qaeda and ISIS do. That's what they use. Give me the same verses, give Raheel the same verses, we can explain them in the way they were historically understood. They claim to be anti-Islam and not anti-Muslim. This term about Islamophobia is very interesting because Raheel explained it really well. We've been able in the United Kingdom, contrary to what you might think, from a governmental perspective, to block this phenomenon of Islamophobia. Islam is a set of ideas, it's a set of values. I live in a liberal democracy, so do we all. In a liberal democracy, no set of ideas, no set of values are beyond critique, parody, or satire, even if they're my ideas, the ones I believe in. I defend the right, even though I'm offended for somebody to burn the Quran. I defend the right for them to do it. But no individual is beneath dignity, and as Raheel mentioned, anti-Muslim bigotry or anti-Muslim hatred is the terminology we use there. They claim to be friendly to the Jewish diaspora. There's a phenomenon that's going around with some of my Jewish friends and others as well, who say, my enemy's enemy is my friend, and will work with elements of the far right. And my response to them is, look at their manifestos. They hated you long before they hated us. Why? There's this new Christian nationalist phenomenon that is actually gaining traction in the United Kingdom. It's coming here. That is gaining traction, and they believe Jews killed Christ. So we're nothing. We just happen to be the enemy right now. But what they're also doing is working with the Islamists. It's really interesting. And of course, we call the green-brown. So we've had the red-green, the regressive left, and the Islamist, green being the Islamist, the red being the regressive left. We've now got the green-brown. In the United Kingdom, one of the leading members of the British National Party, which is officially the Nazi Party, Nick Griffin, works with 5 Pillars, which is the leading Islamist website in the English language. Ziada, she works with them. Why? Well, guess what? It's Jews, Jews, Jews everywhere. And what we've moved from is not Jews are evil, but everything evil is Jewish. In the United Kingdom, they're working together. And it's coming here. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Islamism beyond Islamist, where the Islamists have managed to actually get others to do their work. This is a really interesting slide, and this is in the UK, it's in the United States, everywhere around the world, and I'm using X, Y, and Z, or X, Y, and Z. And at any one moment in time, there are X amounts of Muslims that support Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, or anybody else. There are Y% that actually want to sympathize. What does that mean? Support is fundraising, recruiting, joining them. Sympathy is the Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat Islami, Islamist space. And then we have Z% that empathize. These are, we don't support jihadists. We don't even have the same goals as them. But we kind of understand why they would want to do it. After the Charlie Hebdo killings in France, 34% of Muslims fell into the empathy space. Gilles de Kerchove, the former head of the Europol's counterterrorism, sitting next to me said The shortest time he has observed somebody going from empathy, sympathy, to becoming operational for a terrorist attack is 2 weeks. We're being filmed, so I can't tell you what I know. But there are instances shorter than that. There was a guy in the United Kingdom called Ziamani. Look him up. He went with a bag with a machete and a hammer to go and kill an off-duty soldier to emulate the killing of drummer Lee Rigby. 3.5 months before he was caught, he was Christian. It can be as short as 2 weeks, it can be longer as well. But this is the urgency that we have. In the space of support, there's nothing anybody in this room can do unless you're somebody from law enforcement here or the FBI or any of the agencies. So what do we do in the United Kingdom? We arrest them. We have a channel program which I was involved in writing, which is a de-radicalization and rehabilitation program. In fact, in the United States, we de-radicalized and rehabilitated the youngest terrorist, convicted terrorist, in the United States. He was 17 years of age, and now is contributing, he's released. The FBI asked us to actually work the program with him, and he is now a positive contributing member of society. And of course, the rehabilitation. That is a space, forget about nobody else in this room should really be getting involved in. But we all have a role in civil society of shifting that graph to the left because of the sheer urgency of the speed. That is the challenge facing us. And I'm talking about Islamism here, but the same can be said now of the regressive left and what's coming in terms of the hard right and the Christian nationalist right. That's coming in a big way. And this is what we called the soft end of preventing violent extremism or combating violent extremism. How do people get radicalized? Okay. This is done because as part of my work within Quilliam, there were 3 of us. There was myself, there was a former senior member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, Majid Nawaz, who spent 5 years within Mubarak's torture chambers when he was 19 years of age, trying to instigate a military coup in Egypt. And there was a former commander for Osama bin Laden against the Soviets. And this is our work on identifying it and interviewing convicted jihadist terrorists, working around the world. The Maldives, a popular holiday destination, had the highest number per capita of Muslims that went to join ISIS. So this is a culmination of 20 years of that kind of work. No one person's journey is the same, but there are 3 categories. In the middle, we have the lens. On the left-hand side, we have grievances. And on the right-hand side, the output. You can see the output is terrorism. On the left-hand side, let's look at the grievances. They really fit in 3 categories. And by the way, every single person in this room has a grievance. When we go to sleep tonight, we're going to have a problem that we're thinking of. My problem, to me, is much bigger than yours. If we just focus on grievance, and that's where we aim, which the regressive left would want us to do, all we're going to be doing is playing whack-a-mole. But there's 3 types. There's genuine, partial, and perceived. Genuine grievance. The leader of the 7/7 bombing in London, whose name happens to be Sadiq Khan, not the mayor. His name was Sadiq Khan. His grievance was he fell in love. Wow. He fell in love with his girlfriend at university. He wanted to marry her. His father said, no. You've got to marry your cousin from Pakistan. You've already been betrothed to her. You've got to marry her. He had a problem. He found people that helped him with the problem. It happens to be members of the band Al-Muhajirun group, linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who helps him find a problem to his solution to his problem. Then we have partial grievances. It is true, my country, the United Kingdom, when I was with Tony Blair and an advisor, I didn't believe in the Iraq war. He allowed me to go on the march. I spent most of the time in a cafe because there were 1 million people there. But then I grew up after that. There are at any given moments in time things that our governments do wrong that we might disagree with. That's the nature of the beast. Foreign policy is often one that these radicalizers will use to radicalize people. And my answer to them is, what has our foreign policy got to do with Muslims traveling thousands of miles to Iraq and Syria to kill other Muslims? Join ISIS and kill other Muslims. As Raheel said, more than 90% of the fatalities of Islamist jihadists are other Muslims. ISIS killed more Muslims than anyone else. They did some high-profile beheadings of people from the West, but it was the local Muslims they were killing. But there is a partial truth in there. And then perceived. A quick story on that. A former senior recruiter for Hizb ut-Tahrir that Raheel mentioned, which is now banned in the United Kingdom. He was on the train. These are smart guys. He saw a Muslim woman, she was wearing a hijab, she was reading a front page of a story that talks about a famous celebrity who had just been found guilty of child sexual abuse. He realized at that moment in time she must have an emotional sense of protection for her child. So he started talking to her. Sister, look at the corrupt, immoral Western society. Look at the role models. Look at what we have. You have a child and you need to protect her. The only way you're going to protect her is to join our movement and set up the global Islamist caliphate and enforce a version of Sharia law, and we will all be happy. He recruited her. This is perceived. There was no grievance. He created it. He's out of Hizb ut-Tahrir. She's still in there, sadly. In the middle, you need the lens and you need charismatic recruiters. And this lens is the Islamist lens. And there's the intellectual, ideological, social, emotional, and spiritual. You know, a lot of people say, Islam says this, and jihadists. By the way, jihad does not mean holy war. Harb al-Muqaddasa is the Arabic for holy war. Give me the word jihad, and I can probably interpret it in 13 different ways. I can use it for good. I can use it for bad, for evil. It literally means struggle, but I can turn it into jihadism if I want to, misquote certain, or misinterpret, or interpret verses of the Quran to suit myself. I can do that. But notice, it's only 1/5 of the elements of radicalization, and the biggest one is the emotional. I remember going into a prison, and I went in and to do a talk on behalf of the government on de-radicalization and the importance of prevention. And they wanted me to talk about Islam, so I didn't. I took in one of my students, and he dressed in the garb. By the way, be aware of people in the garb. People who claim to be imams, who claim to be whatever, ask them some serious questions, and if they don't answer them or aren't able to answer them, you can quickly cut through that. But I took this guy with me, and I did my thing, and he was my student, and he did his thing, but he looked the part. Afterwards, the deputy warden said, "We've got a guy who's giving us a few problems. Can you talk to him?" So I sent the imam in training. By the way, he'd been to Al-Azhar University. He'd already had his Egyptian sort of bachelor's study in theology, but then he ended up in my hands. And I hobnobbed it, as we say, with the deputy warden. He went in the same color as me. He came out pale. And I made a joke, "Sheikh, did you de-radicalize him?" And he went like this. I thought, uh-oh. So I leaned over and I asked him in Arabic, "What's the matter?" And he replied to me in Urdu, not in Arabic, "The guy's got a point." He went in with his theological, he was armed with theology. That's all he had. He went in with his theology, he said he won the theological debate, but then the guy hit him with the intellectual, the ideological, the social, and the emotional, and the guy had nothing. So be aware of people in these clothes. Within the lens, There are 7 key behaviors at a macro level that they actually try to create. It's tribal groupthink. That's what it is. The first one is the otherization, that anybody who's not in this gang in the middle is the other. Jews. Right now it's Jews, but it's also non-Muslims, it's other Muslims, people who are not the same as them. Then there's the collectivization, that everybody outside is the same, the oppression narrative, the gang. I call it the global Muslim Ummah gang. The Islamists are being oppressed. Everybody outside, there's collective guilt. If you're not in the gang, you're responsible for the guilt. And then you have the supremacism narrative, that everybody inside the gang is more superior. That's not illegal in a liberal democracy. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, all these people, they do not radicalize anybody. Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat Islami, other groups, they do the first 5. These other groups come along and tip them over the edge. And then you've got the output. Dalia talked about the strategic blueprints. I won't talk about that. The exploratory memorandum is what she talks about. In 1982, we had the project. This is the grand master plan. 4 key areas where they work. Dalia talks about the Palestinization of Islam. They work in the policy impact, legal frameworks, the institutional capacity of infiltration. Dalia talks about that. And then there's the narrative control. Movements of money, I talked about Qatar. Qatar, proof, Qatar arms Hamas, funds Hamas. How do they do it? Well, coming to a town near you, coming to an institution near you, money laundering, they send the money, the source of funds, state of Qatar, they send it to a charity, in this instance, Qatar Charity, it goes to London, Nectar Trust, and then it goes around the world. So when you have university presidents saying, we don't receive money from Qatar, it's a technicality. They receive it from Qatari proxies. And of course, that's the movement of it. So what do we do? Final slide. What can you do? What can we do? There's some things that you can do, some things that we can do. We can diagnose the problem. There's plenty out there. We can deconstruct it with evidence. We're doing that. We've had some major wins in the United States. Texas A&M have decided to pull out of Doha Education City in Qatar because we exposed the fact that they were giving away students' information. They had $1.something billion worth of undocumented money. And all of the research, the intellectual property belongs to Qatar. And guess what? 10% of it had potential dual-use weapons. So rather than face lawsuits, they have pulled out of Doha. The Brown's Choices program, Qatar Foundation, they pulled out. Qatar Foundation International now is closing its operation in the United States. Other wins, we're working very closely with the administration and various other people. Disruption is very important, but the displace is the area that Raheel talked about. We, as a civil society, need to tackle this problem in the same way that we would tackle other isms, whether it's racism, whether it's fascism, whether it's communism. There is a fear to come together and tackle this. That is what we can do as a community. And I'll just wrap up, and the final thing I'll say is that one of the biggest problems that we face is that we're living in a post-truth era. We're living in an era where narratives, whoever controls the narrative, controls the truth. Whoever tells the best story has the monopoly on what the truth is. There is one truth that we have, and that is the omnicultural element of the truth. The things that we all have in common as human beings. And if we can focus on that, it doesn't matter anymore whether you're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, American, Canadian, British, whatever you are. That's what we need to focus on. And let's get in a room, break bread, and tell our truth. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for staying. We appreciate that. would like to, we can sit here, we don't have to stand up. My first question to you, Haras, I wanted to hear about what was going on in England specifically. We hear about the groups running around raping young women and stuff like that. Is it coming to a point in the United Kingdom that the people who are speaking about, we want to be English again, we want to support who we are in our country, as opposed to the areas where they want to destroy, as you said? I'm asking you, what is going on in England? Is England over?
No, England is not over. I talked about narratives. Grooming gangs is something that you brought up. The definition of a grooming gang is where you have two or more people who commit rape, child sexual exploitation offenses against a girl on repeated occasions. That's a grooming gang. Anybody who does individual child sexual offenses is not part of a grooming gang. 90-something% of the people that are convicted for child sexual offenses in the United Kingdom are not Muslim, they're white. However, in the grooming gangs, 80-something% of the people that have been convicted are people from Pakistani, Somalian, different ethnicities. There is an overrepresentation within the grooming gang space of people who happen to be my diaspora and others. In the United Kingdom, there is our liberal democracies, our desire to be tolerant is being used by people who are intolerant to actually get their way. Karl Popper talks about the paradox of intolerance, and he said that liberal democracy and tolerance is actually under threat unless it defends itself through intolerant people being able to take control or destroy it. This is an observation he had from the Weimar Republic. We have people from the left, from the right, from Islamists, who are the biggest threat by far, who are trying to change our liberal democracy. And the realization that I have had is things are going to get worse before they get better. There is, in Belfast, some of you may have seen what happened. That wasn't actually even a jihadist attack. Did any of you see this guy who was trying to kill this other person with a knife, and then we had these riots in Belfast? You may have seen it. Those two people were friends. The migrant had moved into the area and was on substances. And the person who was attacked was also on substances. And in fact, they helped him move into the area. And this was an altercation between two people who were drunk and high. And he grabbed a kitchen knife and he did what he did. There was no jihadist attack. There was no migrant. This was two people. He was actually getting beaten up. The response was people reading the Lord's Prayer and burning down houses. There are going to be serious levels of violence before it gets better. But people who are English, people who are British, this sense of culture, that will come through in the same way that this spirit came through World War II. I have every faith and confidence that there are enough people that will see this through.
Okay. Raheel, one of our first speakers here in Aspen as Aspen Counterpoint, which is the name our organization started with, we had a half-day symposium that was very long, too long. But Phyllis Chesler was invited to speak. And she spoke about the fact she was one of the founders of the feminist movement in this country with Gloria Steinem and that group. She was relating to us, and this was 16 years ago, how she has been basically thrown out of the feminist grouping and thought because of two things. And this has always enraged me. The first is, why have not the feminist organizations in this country spoken out against the treatment of women in Islamic countries? Not all the same, sure, but also in our country, the honor killings, the female genital mutilation. Why has the feminist movement not spoken out against this? And the other reason she was ostracized was because she supported Israel. Well, I mean, do we have to have a special conference on this at the Aspen Institute
Yes.
to find out why?
Yes. Alan, thank you for that question. It's extremely important to me because for a major part of my life, I have been a women's rights activist coming from Pakistan, lots of issues, and I know Phyllis Chesler well, and I stand with her in this situation exactly where she is. Long before October 7th, which of course was a landmark case of where the feminist movement, where the Western feminist movement failed us. But long before that, when I was looking at atrocities, honor killings, forced and underage marriage, I don't know if any of you are aware that today in Afghanistan, the Taliban have codified a law that allows girls as young as 9 years old to get married. Just think about it. And the world is silent. So that's, the policymakers, because it's on the back burner. So definitely we need a conference about this. But the fact that the Western feminist movements would never bring up what was happening in Muslim-majority societies. So we made a documentary called Honor Diaries, and I would love to come and screen it, which addresses these three issues through Muslim voices. And we speak about the fact female genital mutilation is on the rise in USA and Canada. Forced and underage marriage is taking place under the radar. All these things are happening. Honor killings are taking place. But where are the feminist groups? They don't speak out because they don't want to be unpopular, like Phyllis and I am. And of course, I have the same thing. I'm criticized for my support for Israel. I'll tell you, I've been to Israel 14 times, more than most of you. And when I was there talking about women's rights, some of the Jewish women came to me and said, you know what, some of the Orthodox Jewish women, they said, we are dealing with some of these issues of domestic violence and so on. Why don't you speak about it? I said, listen, I've got enough on my own plate dealing with what is happening in Muslim majority societies. I'll support you, but, let's take this up. It's not happening. It is not happening, Alan. When October 7th happened, these so-called feminist movements, the Me Too movement, I'm so disappointed. It was Me Too unless you're a Jew. That's what it ended up being, not a peep out of them. So here's what we did. There has to be. Our organization, 6 months after October 7th, we had been talking amongst ourselves about how the sexual violence could go unchecked, how nobody is talking about it. Everybody is veering around it. We organized a huge conference in Toronto where all our Muslim board members came and spoke. It was the first Muslim organization that set up a conference on March 3rd, 2024. And we lashed out at the feminist movements. The feminist groups were invited. They didn't come to this. It was called Women on the Front Lines. And there's nothing I'd like more than to replicate that right here, because people need to know what is happening. And our conference was based on facts. Professor Ruth Halperin-Kadari, who runs a project called the DINA Project, you should check it out, has done all the statistical work, the stories, the background. So if anyone had even an iota of doubt that this didn't happen, they need to check this out. And we've presented at the United Nations on this as well. Thank you.
Very disturbing.
It is very.
Questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Please hold it close to your mouth.
The word is cutter. For the last 5 or 10 years, whether it's Al Jazeera, whether it's giving El Presidente a new airplane, or whether it's giving $300-400 billion over the last 10 years to universities in this country, where is the other side, or where is the leadership in the UK, Canada, the United States, to understand how these geniuses with incredible amounts of money have been so remarkably efficient in promoting what they want to do?
So this is a lot of my work at ISGAP, taking on Qatar, exposing them, etc. First of all, you have to understand why Qatar is doing it. Why is a small state with only 300,000 citizens, that's all it has, doing what it's doing? It's their ability to punch above their weight. It's their ability to control and play double games with Hamas sitting in their house, and on the other side trying to negotiate the release of hostages. There isn't a desire at this moment in time, including in the United States, from the leadership, the political leadership, to take this beast on because they're holding all the cards. That's the problem. The money, the access, etc., the desire doesn't exist in the West right now. The only country in the world right now that is actually taking them on is the United States. And by the way, I say Israel as well. You should read about Qatargate in Israel. The exposures that happened over the last few weeks about the infiltration of Qatar within Israel. There's a port, the Haifa port, Qatar. How? Qatar bought out shares in the Adani Group in India, and the Adani Group own the port, and Qatar is controlling it. So Qatar is actually deeply entrenched with Israel, within Israel as well. The only country in the world at the moment that's taking them on is the United Arab Emirates. Even the Saudis have acquiesced a little bit for the fact that the United States did not defend the Gulf countries from drone attacks and missiles is outrageous and driven countries like Saudi Arabia to look elsewhere. Pakistan, even Turkey, the strategic deal that's been, even the other day, China. The only country in the Middle East that has fully aligned itself at this moment in time with Israel is the United Arab Emirates. And it's the only one that's taking Qatar on at the moment. Within the US, you talked about the plane that's been gifted. There's many, many other things that are happening, and I'm happy to talk about this offline, about people getting rich. But Qatar is a beast that people aren't taking on at the moment. We're certainly doing it.
Yes, let's take one.
I was actually going to ask a similar question, which is, first of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for all the work you do at ISGAP. But I was going to ask a similar question. And, when you go and brief our, Congress or your own governments, I was wondering the kind of responses that you get when you expose these things.
I'll tell you about Canada. I've gone and given briefings in Ottawa to the Parliament. I mean, this is not new. I've been doing it for 25 years, starting from the radicalization issue. They listen very carefully, they applaud, they say, well done, and that's it. There really has not been any action in terms of policy or law, but what the difference in our work now with the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, we are working now very closely with lawyers, policy writers, lawmakers, and with them, we are doing more policy work and presenting papers to Parliament. You know, this red tape takes a long time. By the time they approve one policy, major amount of damage has already been done. And so, you know, we have to work very quickly.
In the United States, it's a bit different. The question that you asked was about Qatar. Now let's talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. We have had some wins, something that I never saw that I would see in my working lifetime. Recently, the United States has designated the Muslim Brotherhood in 3 countries, Lebanon, Egypt, and Jordan. I spent 2 months in Jordan working on this, and my colleagues in other places. Because the Muslim Brotherhood does not exist in the UK, United States, and Canada as an entity. Who do you ban it? Who do you ban if it doesn't exist? It exists via proxies. So the first step of the process is to find them and prove that these entities in these countries meet the legal threshold. And by the way, that may well be expanded. I'm choosing my words very carefully. That may well be expanded to other countries. The next phase is, what do we do about the people here? And that's to prove connections with CARE, with groups like that, with these people that are actually banned. And there are many, many investigations that OFAC Treasury have opened up as a direct. So there is a willingness to take on the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamism, but not so much Qatar yet.
I would also say that all of these governments, the leaders and the politicians in these governments are simply scared of losing their position. As the Muslim population grows and the smaller percentage of it that is so vocal, we see it in our country here. And people, I mean, Chuck Schumer's running for his life because he knows he's going to be knocked out by this bartender, okay? And they are frightened of not getting votes or of losing votes, and it takes away their spine. There is no spine. And that's part of what we're dealing with. Let's take one last question.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you both for being here, and to Dalia, too, and thank you for all that you do. I wanted to ask you, Raheel, if you would give us the name again and spell the names of the 2 candidates you said that are running in this country from your organization.
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Dr. Zudi, you guys say Z, right? Z-U-H-D-I is his first name, and his last name is J-A-S-S-E-R. Dr. Zudi Jasser from Arizona.
And he was here at that first Muslim conference we had 6-7 years ago. He is also a captain in the Naval Reserve. He is quite a guy.
If you Google him, you'll find his book. He is brilliant, and we've known him for like 3 decades. What I really admire about him specifically is his national spirit of loyalty to this country. He is first and foremost an American, although he is of Syrian heritage. His parents came from Syria. Beautiful. You should look that up. The second one in Minnesota is Dalia, like this D-A-L-I-A, and her last name is A-L-Al-Aqidi, A-Q-U-I-D-I. No, sorry, there's no U. This is one time there's no U. A-Q-I-D-I, Dalia Al-Aqidi. She's of Iraqi heritage, but she has been fighting this battle for a long time. So please look these people up and support them if you can, because what Dalia is doing, fighting against Ilhan Omar, is absolutely challenging. Republican. Yes.
I want to invite you all to come up and ask your questions in person to Raheel, to Haras, to Sohail. I cannot tell you how thankful we are for what you have told us today and for your support against this Jew hatred spreading like wildfire. Thank you so very, very much.